Good morning, Wabash. Today, speaking at Pioneer Chapel, is Dr. Adriel Trott. Dr. Trott is chair and associate professor of philosophy and the chair of the gender studies minor at Wabash. Her second book, Aristotle on the Matter of Form, A Feminist Metaphysics of Generation, is due out from Edinburgh University Press this month. A native of Philadelphia, Dr. Trott enjoys talking about pop culture and philosophy, taking on new house projects, being outdoors, and traveling. Last Saturday, she ran in the Indianapolis Women's Half Marathon. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Trott.
Good morning, Wabash. Today, I want to talk to you about the cheery subject of misogyny. I titled my talk, Misogyny, It's Not What You Think. But maybe you don't think anything about it. Maybe you've never heard the word before. Maybe you've heard it, but you don't know what it means. Maybe, like a good student, you looked it up in the dictionary, and you learned that misogyny is the hatred of women. According to the dictionary definition, misogyny is a hateful attitude individuals who are prone to hatred or hostility toward women exhibit toward women, an attitude triggered just by recognizing that someone is a woman. A culture is misogynist insofar as it contains, fosters, and is dominated by people who have this feeling or attitude toward women. So why am I talking about the hatred of women when we're at an event where you invited me, a woman, to speak? Clearly you love me. You probably also like all your women professors, and you probably, for the most part and most of the time, love your moms, your sisters, your girlfriends, your friends who are girls. Misogyny, it turns out, is a tricky thing. You can want women to love you and take care of you and still be a misogynist. How, you ask? Well, the first thing you need to be able to do in order to combat misogyny is to know how to recognize it. The term misogyny emerged in the 17th century in response to an anti-woman pamphlet written in 1615 by an English fencing master called The Arraignment of Lewd, Idle, Froward, meaning disobedient, and Unconstant Women. Joseph Swetnam, the author of this pamphlet, wrote that, quote, "Many travelers live in disdain of women. The reason is that their affections are so poisoned with the heinous evils of unconstant women, which they happen to be acquainted with in their travels." He goes on, quote, "There is no woman so good but has one idle part or other in her which may be amended," end quote. And further, quote, "Women are all necessary evils, and yet not all are given to wickedness," end quote. Swetnam writes in the first part of the pamphlet that women are put on earth to be helpers to men, but in asserting their own will and independence, fall short of playing that role for men. The problem Swetnam finds with women is not just in their being women. He wants women to be better helpers to him and his fellow men. The problem is that women step out of this restricted role and assert their own will. In response to Swetnam's pamphlet, someone anonymously wrote a play called Swetnam the Woman Hater, Arraigned by Women. The character standing in from Swetnam was named Misogynos, entering the term into the English language. So misogyny refers to a hatred of women who step out of their restricted place. But that's the 17th century. Hasn't that all gone away in the 21st century? Alas. On May 23, 2014, 22-year-old Elliot Rodger killed 6 people and injured 14 others near the campus of University of California, Santa Barbara, before killing himself inside of his vehicle. Rodger first stabbed 3 men in his apartment and then drove to a sorority house on campus and tried to gain entry. Failing that, he shot 3 women outside of the sorority. 2 of them died. He then sped through Isla Vista, shooting pedestrians and wounding several with his car. Before Elliot Rodger drove to the sorority house, he uploaded a video to YouTube called Elliot Rodger's Retribution. He then emailed his manifesto called My Twisted World, the Story of Elliot Rodger, to his family, his therapist, and several friends. Like Swetnam, Rodger was mad at women for not fulfilling what he considered the proper role for women. He writes in one part of his manifesto, quote, "The way I was treated by girls in high school, especially that evil bitch X, sparked an intense fear of girls. The funny part of this is that I had a secret crush on X. She was the first girl I ever had a crush on, and I never admitted it to anyone. To be teased and ridiculed by the girl I had a crush on wounded me deeply." End quote. Later in the manifesto, Rodger writes, quote, "But I could never forgive the world for denying me such things in the past. I deserve better than that. I am an intelligent gentleman, and I deserve the love of girls more than the other obnoxious boys of my age. And yet they get girls, and I don't. That is a crime that can never be forgotten, nor can it be forgiven." End quote. After the shooting, some commentators argued that Rodger couldn't be considered a misogynist because he killed men as well as women. Indeed, he seemed to be motivated by unrequited desire for women rather than hatred of women. Feminist theory and gender studies can give us vocabulary and theory to analyze these moments. On the surface, they don't seem to be misogyny because the attitude isn't one of hating women. Rodgers and Swetnam want more of women. Feminist theory goes beyond the common usage to develop vocabulary and theory in order to explain what is happening in our world. The problem with the dictionary definition of misogyny, hatred of women, is that it doesn't explain how men can be violent against women out of anger that women don't like them. And it doesn't explain how men who seem to want to hold on to a system of gender inequality can like or even love women. In a patriarchal system, you might have plenty of men who, though wanting to make the world in which men have power, still like women. They want women to be their wives, want to be taken care of by them, and want to take care of them. Feminist philosopher Kate Mann, a professor at Cornell University, argues in her book, Down Girl, The Logic of Misogyny, that the dictionary definition does not adequately capture the phenomenon that leads men to respond violently to women. She argues that while misogyny might be felt personally, ultimately it is not an individual issue, but a political one. As she defines it, quote, "Misogyny ought to be understood as the system that operates within a patriarchal social order to police and enforce women's subordination and to uphold male dominance," end quote. Misogyny, then, is not about men hating women. Misogynists can have wives and daughters that they love and support. As the cases of Swetnam and Rodger demonstrate, misogyny views women as those who should occupy certain roles, and when they fail to comply with those expectations, misogyny names the mistreatment that forces them back in line. Misogyny is the hostility that women face for being women in a man's world who refuse to accept that it is a man's world. Rodger exemplifies this misogyny when he speaks of sex as something that was being denied him, as an injustice that is being done to him. He writes, quote, "I saw sex as an evil and barbaric act, all because I was unable to have it. This was the major turning point. My anger made me stronger inside," end quote. Rodger's misogyny makes him go further. He bristles at seeing attractive couples and writes, quote, "To watch another boy experience it with a beautiful girl who should be mine was a living hell," end quote. Rodger resents other men, but his hatred is for women who refuse him. He writes, quote, "I had nothing left to live for but revenge. Women must be punished for their crimes of rejecting such a magnificent gentleman as myself," end quote. Throughout the 141 pages of the manifesto, he repeats this structure of the complaint. No girl wants to be my girlfriend. I wanted women. I hated women. I deserved access to women's bodies. They were wrong for refusing me. For their failure to play the good woman to him, Rodger went out on a shooting spree at a sorority. On Kate Mann's account of misogyny, it is not about hating women as women. It is about punishing women who step out of women's roles as prescribed in a patriarchal society. Women who act as loving wives, devoted moms, cool girlfriends, good waitresses, loyal secretaries are treated well because they are filling the role the system sets out for them. When women fulfill the roles of being men's attentive, loving subordinates, they are treated well by them. The patriarchal system might fail in some instances to keep women in those prescribed roles, but still function generally to relegate women to this position. It is when it fails, especially, that misogyny steps in to do its work. Then women who step out of those roles are punished. That's what misogyny is, the punishing. As, for example, when women refuse to date or sleep with a man and are, ironically, called sluts. I have been heartened in my time overseeing gender studies at Wabash by how committed Wabash students are to thinking and learning about gender inequality and what they can do about it. We hear a lot about expanding Wabash's footprint. For a small school, the impact that Wabash has on Indiana and the country is impressive. What if we took that effort to expand the college's footprint in the direction of combating misogyny? Elliot Rodger is not alone in his thinking that women owed him for what he expected of them and for punishing them for not giving him what he wanted. Rodger became a hero of the growing internet group who call themselves involuntary celibates, or incels. Incels are mostly men who have never had sex or romantic relationships and who blame women for their celibacy because women are unwilling to have sex with them. Incels gained recognition when their subreddit grew to 40,000 users. Posts included topics such as, all women are sluts, proof that girls are nothing but trash that use men, and reasons why women are the embodiment of evil. One poster argued that involuntary celibacy, which he described as a man not consenting not to have sex, is equivalent to rape when a woman does not consent to having sex. Incels created a trailer for Rodger, calling him the supreme gentleman. One incel, who was an admirer of Rodger, Alec Manassian, killed 10 people and wounded 14, mostly women, in Toronto by driving a van down a busy street. Before he went on his rampage, he posted on Facebook, "All hail the supreme gentleman, Elliot Rodger." At incels.co, one poster wrote, quote, "Women want to be raped and men want to rape, but humans created these convoluted rules that we have to play so that we don't have to admit to ourselves we're just disgusting animals, so people have to find weird arbitrary loopholes to act out rape with each other in a manner in which they can fool themselves with mental gymnastics and tell themselves it's just a fantasy," end quote. The user goes on, quote, "What's insane is to live in a society that restricts male urges and supports female urges, and to play by that rigged rule set and handicap yourself. That's not just insane, it's illogical," end quote. Incels seem to be behind a number of shooting incidents in the last several years. A friend of Connor Betts, the shooter behind the August 5th, 2019 Dayton, Ohio shooting, told CNN that Betts kept a rape list for girls who had turned him down for dates. Hannah Shows, who had been Betts' friend since 7th grade, discovered that she was on the list. Discovered that she was on the list that he made and that he was threatening sexual violence. She had turned him down, and as she said to the New York Times, "After that, it turned into cold hatred the way he stared at me." Mika Carpenter, who met Betts at summer camp when they were both 13, repeated this sentiment, quote, "He was kind of hateful to women because they didn't want to date him," end quote. Taylor Ford, who went to summer camp with Betts, remembered watching Betts choke a girl he was dating. He was in a porno grind band, whatever that means, called Menstrual Munchies, with extremely graphic and violent lyrics. The week before the Dayton shooting, on July 29th, 2019, Santino William Legan killed 3 people and injured 13 at an outdoor festival in Gilroy, California. Ligon celebrated the book Might is Right, a white supremacist treatise that states, quote, "Women and children belong to men who must hunt for them as well as for himself. He is their lord and master in theory and in fact." It continues, quote, "In all sexual relations, as in everything else, morality is what strength decrees. Women are frail beings at the best of times. For the welfare of the breed and the security of descent, they must be held in thorough subjection. Man has captured them, and besides providing for and protecting them, it is necessary to keep them on the chain, as it were. Woe unto him, and woe unto them, and woe unto our race, if ever these lovable creatures should break loose from mastership and become rulers or equals of man." End quote. Between the shooting in Dayton and the shooting in California, Patrick Crusius shot 22 people dead in a Walmart in El Paso on August 3rd, 2019. Crusius complained of race mixing. This complaint might seem like a separate one from that of the incels, but it is similarly focused on controlling women and who they sleep with. The idea is that white women should be responsible for perpetuating the white race. This sentiment from Might is Right was captured by Daily Stormer publisher Andrew Anglin. Anglin wrote that women in interracial relationships and marriage should be scorned, quote, "because it's our womb. That's right, it doesn't belong to her, it belongs to the males in her society. That the womb of a white woman in an interracial relationship is being used to produce an enemy soldier," end quote. The antipathy against women who don't sleep with these men, or by white women against women who sleep with men of other races, captures a contradiction at work here. People accuse these men of misogyny, but their acts of aggression and violence seem to come about not because they hate women, but because they want women to be their vision of what women should be to them: sexually available and willing, concerned with making men happy. Patriarchal society is structured to position women as subordinated to men. Soft forms of social power work to make women seem like they are freely choosing these roles, when in fact, subtle forms of pressure lead them to choose these roles so that they won't be penalized. If a woman is repeatedly called names when she turns a man down for a date, and she worries about whether this hostility will turn into violence, she might feel like she can't turn him down, even though she doesn't want to go on a date with him. In this way, misogyny has disciplined her to get in line with the expectations of who she should be as a woman, willing to date men whenever they ask. Misogyny is, as Mann puts it, a shock collar. Mass shootings are both an extreme and an impersonal example of misogyny. What they capture is that misogyny is not about hating women because they are women. It's about punishing women for stepping out of the roles prescribed to them by a patriarchal world. Sexual assault and domestic violence are further ways that misogyny plays out. A recent study found that 1 in 5 Indiana women have been raped. 1 in 10 women have been raped by an intimate partner. 1 in 4 women experience severe violence from their intimate partner. 1 in 3 women experience some form of physical violence from an intimate partner in their lifetime. The ways abusive men keep women in abusive relationships speaks to the sense of misogyny I am describing. By criticizing women, calling them sluts, ugly, bad mothers, the abuser breaks down the identity of the abused. Abusers further make the abused feel responsible in ways that contribute to this notion that the abuse comes to women because they fail to fulfill their womanly duty. This abuse is often prompted by the perception on the part of the abuser that the victim is not fulfilling her role based on unreasonable standards the abuser has for what a perfect home or meal should look like, and suggesting that the woman deserves the abuse as punishment for falling short of that perfect home or meal. Sexual harassment is another way that misogyny works. It can function to remind women trying to show up in the world as classmates or colleagues that they are sexual objects rather than fully fledged independent agents of their own desires and projects. 1 in 3 women are sexually harassed in the workplace. As one legal human resources consultant explains, sexual harassment can include unwelcome sexual advances, requests for sexual favors, and other verbal or physical harassment of a sexual nature. The most difficult ones are the ones that begin as consensual relationships, but then turn into ugly abuses of power." End quote. Often in these cases, women are made to feel like it is their fault, and the workplace becomes uncomfortable, and she ultimately decides to leave, returning to her proper place in the patriarchal schema, not in the workplace. Evidence that sexual harassment functions as a punishment to women who gain power, which is to say, evidence that such harassment is misogynist, can be found in a longitudinal study, that's a study that takes place over a significant amount of time, that included qualitative interviews that found that while popular characterizations of sexual harassment are of male supervisors harassing female subordinates, female supervisors are more likely to report harassing behaviors than non-supervisors and to define their experiences as sexual harassment. Women who become powerful become targets for sexual harassment because their power shows that they have stepped out of the acceptable role for women in a man's world. Calling powerful and ambitious women, women who won't bend to the will of men, bitch, is an example of how women are punished for not staying in the lane that is considered the women's lane. In his video that he made before he went to shoot up the sorority at UCSB, Elliot Rodger said, quote, "You girls have never been attracted to me. I don't know why you girls aren't attracted to me, but I will punish all for it. It's an injustice, a crime, because I don't know what you don't see in me. I'm the perfect guy, and yet you throw yourselves at these obnoxious men instead of me, the supreme gentleman. I will punish you all for it. On the day of retribution, I'm going to enter the hottest sorority of UCSB, and I will slaughter every spoiled, stuck-up, blonde slut I see inside there. All those girls I've desired so much, they would have all rejected me and looked down upon me as an inferior man if I ever made a sexual advance towards them. You will finally see that I am in truth the superior one, the true alpha male. And girls, all I ever wanted was to love you and to be loved by you. I've wanted a girlfriend, I've wanted sex, I've wanted love, affection, adoration. You think I'm unworthy of it. That's a crime that can never be forgiven. If I can't have you girls, I will destroy you. You denied me a happy life, and in turn, I will deny all of you life. It's only fair." End quote. I read this word for word because I want you to be familiar with the mindset behind the incels who are encouraging violence against women to put them back in their rightful place. Note how Rodger thinks of himself as superior and therefore wronged by being denied access to women's bodies by those women, to the extent that he thinks he is justified in violence against women, even to the point where he considers them animals. As animals, they are merely bodies for him and his ends, not agents to be considered ends in themselves, having their own projects and concerns. Then he blames them for his violence against them for their refusal of his love. So how can Wabash men combat misogyny? I generally assume that Wabash men want to be good guys. So what does being a good guy look like in the face of misogyny operating in the world around you as the way that women who step out of the expected roles of women are treated? One thing that feminist theory and gender studies makes possible by developing a vocabulary and theory about gender relations is that by being able to name gender-related phenomena, one can begin to recognize it in the world. And by being able to recognize it, to call it out and change it in yourself and others. So the first step is recognizing it, seeing misogyny as punishing women for not fulfilling stereotypical women's roles. Rodger epitomizes misogyny. He set out to kill women, any women he could find, because he couldn't get women to be for him what he wanted and expected women to be. Rodger is an extreme example, but that doesn't mean that misogyny only exists in extremes. It might operate by a man getting mad at a woman when she says she can't spend time with him because she has another priority, like her own schoolwork or taking care of herself. Misogyny could be at work when men resent women for having their own interests and not focusing solely on them. Misogyny could be at work when a man calls a woman a prude or a slut for not wanting to be as sexually intimate as he wants to be, or as soon into the relationship as he wants to be. Growing up in a world that continues, however attenuated by recent efforts by women, to put men in positions of leadership in business and education and politics exponentially more than women, to expect women, even in positions of leadership, to still be softer and more maternal and caretaking than men, to assume that women cannot flourish in fields deemed to require genius, might lead a man to respond to women who are not interested in being caretaking, maternal, or sexually available to him, who are driven, ambitious, and highly competent in their chosen field, as colleagues and as bosses, with resentment, bitterness, and frustration. Supposing that women are taking men's jobs as if the jobs are more rightfully men's, and treating women aggressively in light of that supposition, that is misogyny. In fact, our culture urges men to act and feel that way, which is why it's so important to be able to recognize and name this dynamic. But now that you have a vocabulary for naming that response, you can think about how to resist it. You can refuse to treat women poorly in light of that feeling. You can refuse to punish women for not fulfilling stereotypical feminine roles, just as I hope you wouldn't punish women for fulfilling those roles. You can recognize when your friends, classmates, coworkers, and bosses are punishing women by their actions or words for not being appropriately womanlike to them. And without being combative with them, you can ask them to consider what their attitude implies. And not only recognize what they are doing, but use your own position to call their attention to how they are treating women and the apparent cause for that treatment. What if Elliot Rodger had been asked to reflect on the reasons that he was upset with women? Not the immediate reason that they wouldn't have sex with him, but on why he thought that was a justifiable reason to be mad at women. What if Elliot Rodger had been asked to consider whether the expectation that women take care of men and be sexually available to them was a reasonable one? Being aware of how misogynist responses to resistance from women, to the independence of women, and to the power of women look can help you recognize it so that you can intervene when those around you engage in misogynist thinking and practices, and help them become cognizant of the underlying assumptions of that thinking and practice. Women's lives and well-being depend on it. Thank you.